your name doesn't need to be like your actual name doesn't need to be the brand name. That it's probably better to go with something else so that you don't have to run yourself into this situation. Again, you just never know where it's going to end up.
Let's get into some talk about buying names back. The week before that.
Yeah.
Listen, shout out to Trap because he killed that episode. But the week before that, we talked about Diddy buying back Sean John, right? Well, it seems like another situation with Jessica Simpson on how Jessica Simpson bought her name back. So Bloomberg Business Week covered it and it said, when your billion-dollar empire implodes, you get a loan, go to bankruptcy court, and start over. All right, now she had a Jessica Simpson collection, which was a clothing brand for like middle class, right? And I'm gonna let Moose talk about it because Moose breaks this down just so lovely.
Yeah,
just
well,
so
I mean, I think the interesting part to me when I came across that post like middle of the week and I sent it to you, it just caught me by surprise that the name Jessica Simpson and billion-dollar brands were used in the same phrase.
talk about it.
I'm like, okay, and again, no offense to Jessica Simpson.
No.
I mean, no whatsoever. But it's just like, wait a minute, where were you for nearly a decade or 20 years, whatever it's been,
Right.
and then pop up on a billion?
Yeah.
What happened? So for us, I think it definitely caught some interest. And why we're sharing it is because we want to show those of you who are building a business, growing a brand, whatever it may be, we want to show you different outlets of how you can do this thing. Yes, there is the bootstrap it, be consistent, pump content until something happens, and then you start rolling out products and services and merchandise and events and partnerships and collabs and ads. That's one way. But clearly, she showed us something that was a little bit different this time around because she was like, well, instead of me having to go throughout this whole process, I have no knowledge of the fashion industry. I don't know how to design. I don't know how to do any of that. So why don't I just use my name and sell it to a company that can?
Yep.
The company is able to now take your name rights and go out and build your brand for you for a sizable fee. Now, when we looked at the percentages, it was a little bit over 60% they were taking, but they also paid her for that.
Right.
So you get a good sizable check in exchange for that. To run it down to where we are now, and I think you spoke on it, their audience, they focused on middle-class females, young teenagers who wanted to kind of be in style somewhat, shopping at Macy's. The brand, when they sold it that way, there was Jessica Simpson's business partner that was involved in the equation that helped to oversee the operation, helped to oversee what was happening, right? How are these deals being made or how is the company performing the whole nine? Unfortunately, that person passed away. And that created a scenario where the company had to reshuffle. So they brought in another young executive who made a promise of like, you know what, we're going to take this thing to 2 or 3 billion. We're going to like double it pretty much in size. And that didn't happen, right? They kind of went into a situation where, according to the article that we read, they overpromised, underdelivered, and couldn't make it happen. So luckily for Jessica Simpson, that company was going bankrupt and they had to sell off everything they owned. So that put the ball back in her court and had her go out to buy that brand back simply because her name is on it. And every time this scenario comes up, I always think about what Virgil said, you know, again, may he rest in peace, of course, but we covered that concept where he says, your name is so important. So when your name is your brand, that's a forever thing. Like you got to be careful what happens with that. So again, we see somebody else wanting to do things right because it's their name. So she goes out and acquires the brand, you know, and puts herself back in the driver's seat.
I think what was interesting about this particular thing was that the licensing situation. Like I think I was really trying to understand it as far as it like, okay, I know licensing is normally for like music.
Yeah.
And she really just was like, okay, I'm gonna sell my name, like let them use it for the best manufacturers to come up with this collection. And I was like, okay. And we were having conversations like, how did you sell if you were already doing the licensing thing? Like, how did this make sense? And we come to find out that after the business partner had passed away, the new company had bought it for about like I want to say, and don't quote me, like 117 million, right? And then afterwards they bought the Martha Stewart one like $300 and some dollars. 300. Wow, that was really cheap. I'm sorry, Martha. I'm sorry. That's not wasn't right. It was $353 million. I apologize. Okay. So what does that mean? So that particular company, right, was too much over their head. And I think what we learned from that is really not, because that particular company said, hey, we could get you to $2 to $3 billion more dollars on a consistent basis, woo, woo, woo. And with those two acquisitions, it was a little bit too much. It was a little bit too much. And it actually went down, and Jessica Simpson was like, all right, hold on. You're messing with my name. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, man, how do we just stay control of it? Like they gave up, like, what was it, 63% up of the, yeah. I'm like, And it was only for not only. It was for 117 million. I promise you, we make things sound so like
so little.
Only this, that, and the third. But how do we not continue to see things like a Jessica Simpson, like a Sean John, and because when they sell it, they actually like the value goes down.
Yeah.
That's what happened to both of them.
Yeah.
Like it just plummets. It's like, so is there a point, even though the goal of having a business is to like sell it eventually. Mm-hmm. But is that the goal? This is a good question. Is that the goal when it's your name?
No, it can't be. So look, I think, and seriously, not to kind of like blow our own horns, but basically, I think the cool thing about the show is that it's giving you so many examples of what to do and what not to do. And clearly in this scenario, you're starting to see that with certain brands, especially if you're going to be pushing product, your name doesn't need to be, like your actual name doesn't need to be the brand name. That it's probably better to go with something else so that you don't have to run yourself into this situation. Again, you just never know where it's going to end up. So your name becomes the brand name, and it's a bad situation because in a lot of businesses, yes, the point is to sell. Like, and for those of you who are like, why are you laughing about that?
Don't mind us.
We just making adjustments to the scene here. We are a two-man show. Oh man, I love it. No, we're just laughing because one of the lights went out, so we're over here literally trying to put it out without or replace the light without making a scene. But at this point, we might as well just tell everybody we're replacing the light. But no, in all seriousness, going back to our conversation, the concept of business, I think to some extent is to sell it, right? Especially if it's when it reaches such a high valuation where you are maybe no longer interested in being in that industry, you don't have others who you can pass it on to, then I don't see that being a bad move. Like we've seen a lot of companies, like, founders of Instagram sold to Facebook, now Meta, and, got their big payout. WhatsApp, a lot of companies is what I'm saying, eventually sell and take their money and go on to something else. So,
this is true.
So yeah, I think the name situation though, it makes it a very sticky concept. Like if the brand that you're building is going to be your name, be prepared to hold on to it for dear life.
That's what it is. That's what it is, people.